Right. Am I going back? There we go. Right. I've got a bag of props here. First of all, my plan. Well, Stuart, less than 3 weeks ago, I'll just say that again, less than 3 weeks ago, Stuart asked me to do a talk on how we got the Bible in one sermon. I got as far as doing slides up until we've got the original languages that the church has agreed is in the Bible, but it will take us too long, I think, to get there. So the slides are all done, and they'll be going on the church family Facebook page at some point today or tomorrow. What I'll do today is get to what the Bible was like at the time of the Gospel in Acts and how it got there. Yeah? So that's the objective. But before I start, I need to talk about this. Is this a book? Of course it is. Yeah? But is it? Right, next bit of the visual aid. The Hobbit. Right, here we go. The Hobbit. This is a book, yeah? Everyone agrees The Hobbit is a book. It looks like a book, it's got pages, all that sort of stuff. It's a story. You know, we all know it's a book. I put The Hobbit on my Kindle. Is it still a book? Yeah? Hobbit's still a book. Is the Kindle a book? Yeah? So, is the Bible like a book like The Hobbit, or is it an old tech version of the Kindle with lots of different books in it? Right? Here is another type of book. This is where it all began. The people to invent writing, as far as we know, were the people who lived in what we now call Iraq, and they used the high tech of mud and a stick, or clay and a stick. And that's a bit of clay. There's an example of it in someone's hand. So it's about the size of the Hobbit, but made of clay. And you get a wee stick, and you go, rather than me do curves and lines with a pen, they'll go with a stick, they'll go that way and that way and that way, and make little indentations and make letters. This is a recipe book dating back to 1730 BC. So, this book was more than 1,000 years old by the time Daniel went to Babylon and said, what Daniel and his pals said, we don't want to eat meat. This recipe book is divided up into recipes that contain meat and recipes that don't contain meat. In other words, 1730 BC, we've already got a meat-free cuisine. Yeah, it's not a new thing. Here's what it looks like side on. Now there's a limit to how big a tablet can be because it's solid clay. You know, it's like a floor tile, only a bit heavier. You know, but there's a limit to how much you can fit on a clay slab. One of the first things people did was write books. Hey, back to books. Now, the amount of book you can fit, the size of a book you can fit into something that size is not very big. The oldest book that we know about, the Epic of Gilgamesh, takes 11 tablets. That's a picture of one of them. So, you need 11 tablets to make that story. So, oh, is it there? Did I leave one there? Oh. I've lost my copy of Oh, here it is, here. Right, so this is an English translation, but it's an English translation with lots of other stuff. So in our pages, it's that much, yeah? But to carry Gilgamesh, you're carrying 11 things the size of a floor tile, yeah? Something like that, you know, it's not that far off, actually. See, that's 10 centimetres that scale. So it's about, the actual tablets are slightly bigger than this, but they're solid clay. Now, books transformed society, without a doubt. You could pass everything from tax to engineering. There's loads of maths textbooks. There's practical things to help engineers, like engineers need to know square roots, so they've got tablets with square roots down to 7 or 8 decimal places. So if you're doing your Pythagoras stuff and you want to know whatever, very elaborate mathematics, all sorts of stuff, and you can pass it on from generation to generation. But it's big. The next transformative technology is a scroll. So someone comes up with the idea of a bit of paper. It's expensive to make paper. It's not just like getting a bit of mud. Then someone came up with the idea of ink. Again, that's complicated. How do you make ink? And then a pen. That's complicated. It's a lot more complicated, a lot more costly than a bit of clay and a stick. But the advantages are huge. Books become so much lighter. And rather than just having a page, which, clay tablet, you've got a page, you can write on that side and that side. With a book, with paper, what you can do is you can join the edges, a page like that, like that, like that, like that, like that, and you've got the whole thing, then you roll it up. This is an example of, this example here is what's called the Great Isaiah Scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you want to know what Isaiah looked like at the time of Jesus, that's one example. And you can see the kind of stitching marks where the various pages have been sewn together. Now, there is a limit to how big a scroll can be. You imagine it, right? If I've got 10 tablets and I want to find the middle bit of the tablet, I just pick up the middle bit of the tablet. If I've got a book like this, in our format, I want to find page 90, I just go to page 90. If you've got a scroll and you want to find page 90, you go, right, that's the first 5 pages, roll it up, move it, roll it up, move it, and do that. Try to get to page 90. It's a hassle. Also, in order to make the pages strong enough so that when you're doing all that shuffling about, it doesn't tear, the pages need to be quite thick, so it becomes quite heavy compared to what we're used to with paper. So there's a limit to how big a scroll can be. So again, way before the times we're talking about, there's a guy called Herodotus. You heard the story of the 300 Spartans, and that comes from this guy. He wrote about it. He's the first guy to write about it, Herodotus. He wrote about 450 BC. He wrote a history of the Persian Empire and how it tackled the Greeks. And when he wrote it, he couldn't fit it into one book. So there are 9 scrolls. And historically, when scholars study this, they will say, it is book 3, section whatever. And one of my favourite bits is book 2, section 98, which says, if you go by boat from Canopus and the coast flats, across the flats to Naucratis, this is in Egypt, you find the town of Archandropolis, which has been made over ever since the Persian conquest of Egypt to the wife of the reigning monarch to keep her in shoes. Right. So you got the idea that one book might be many scrolls. Now, the other thing that comes across with the invention of books, of course, is libraries and bookshops. So you have all these scrolls, but you know that some of these scrolls belong to a book, and some of the scrolls belong to another book. And there are different types of books. So if you go back to the cookbook, the Hobbits like food, yeah? If you think, there's a story about a book, I'll get a recipe book, you're going to be disappointed because the plot's rubbish and there's no characterization, yeah? Equally, if you want to make recipes, you think, there's lots of food in the Hobbit, I'll pick up the Hobbit, you think, the recipes are pants, I can't make anything from this, yeah? So different types of books need to be read in different ways. If you try to read the Hobbit as a cookbook, you'll just find it really difficult to understand, yeah? If you try to read a cookbook as a novel, it'll do your head in, right? So, the other thing is quality varied by price. You could get a book for the price of a newspaper or the price of a novel, a paperback, but it would be done on really poor quality paper, and someone would just go as fast as they could. They'd copy what you've written as quickly as they could, as quickly as they could, as quickly as they could. There you go, done. Quality control was not. There's no quality control, and the paper that's written on might last a couple of years if you're lucky, a couple of weeks if you're unlucky. At the other extreme, you've got the writing will be done by a professional scribe who'll take their time. It'll be quality checked by another professional scribe, and then again by a third professional scribe. It will be done on paper that will last longer than you will, and that book will cost you the equivalent of a year's salary for the average person. So you've got this range of quality, which includes the range of longevity, but also the range of accuracy, because there's no printing, yeah? It's all handwritten. So, that's the technology background. We'll now look at the cultural, political background that's important. So, for most of the Old Testament, Israel is kind of this little circle down here. I'm not good with colours. What colour's that round? So the purple circle around Israel, purple circle around Scotland. So Scotland is probably about 2 or 3 times the size of Israel at its biggest size. By the time you get to the end of the Book of Kings, the end of the Book of Chronicles, that little dot in the middle, what colour's that little dot in the middle? Or red? Red. So the wee red dot in the middle, that's about the size of the kingdom of Judah, which is about the same size as Perth and Kinross. Yeah? So, in that context, law, education, worship, everything centres on Jerusalem. There's none of this weekly service, because you're not going to go to Jerusalem every week if you live 2 days walk away, but you have these big festivals that happen, Passover, where you will go, the whole community gathers, they have a big ceremony, and then they go back again. Right, so that's all okay until the Babylonians, 587, 586 BC, still that's under debate. Jerusalem's destroyed, people are sent into exile, they go to the wind. Now, some people will read Ezra and Nehemiah and say all the people of Israel came back, but that ignores Esther. If you look at Esther, Esther says the Jews are through all 127 provinces of the empire, so that's all the way from India to Ethiopia. So if you look at a map, the same map, that's roughly the spread of the Jews within the Persian Empire at that time. And there may have been Jews, probably Jews outside the empire at that time, but at least the Jews were as far widespread as that. So the idea of a spiritual life centered on Jerusalem ain't going to happen, yeah? It's not, it's impractical. So a group of people called the Great Assembly came up with an answer, or came up with a set of plans. It's generally agreed that scribes, people who are good at writing, sages, scholars, and prophets. The role of prophets is very important in this, in discerning God's will. So it's scholarship plus librarianship plus prophecy all working together. Was it a group of people all in one place all at one time? Or was it a dispersed group that were communicating by letters and visiting each other? We don't know. Traditionally, it includes Mordecai, Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. It happened after the destruction of the temple, before Alexander did his thing in 333 BC. My guess is sometime between 550 and 400, but maybe a bit narrower. Anyway, they had plans to keep the Jews as Jews and to keep worshipping Jehovah. And I'm going to ignore most of the plans, but one of the plans is a kind of library of spiritual books. A holy library that was small enough that even poor communities could afford it. It was small enough to be easily transportable. It would fit in a reasonable box. Because all the scrolls, you need to have them separate boxes, because if you just pile them on top of each other, they'll all crush and they'll bend and they'll crack and they'll be destroyed. You can't do that like we can. You can't do that with a scroll. Oh, I've pressed the button too often. Right, oh, sorry. Right. So, sorry about all this bad button pressing. bad button discipline. So the library, they had three parts. The law, something in Hebrew it's called the Torah, you may have heard of that. The prophets and the writings. So just as we have novels and cookbooks, you read them differently, they had books of the law, the prophets, and the writings. Yeah. So, we know about law. Law, nowadays, includes codes. Yeah? This is a list of things you should and shouldn't do. But law also includes case law. So, this is the previous experience of judges or the deliberate decisions that judges make to help you decide whether or not a particular thing falls under the law of theft. And then if it does fall under the law of theft, what punishments are appropriate in this set of circumstances. And in legal theory, you've got the question, what came first? Did a community come up with a consensus of what's good and bad practice and then turn that into a codified set of laws? Or did people start with a codified set of laws and then work out the case law after it? Another debate for another time. Right, the books of the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Now, throughout, I'm going to have a couple of questions. They're all in bright yellow. So the first question, would we read Genesis differently if we read it as a law book? Because that's how it's described by the Jews. It's a book of the law, first and foremost. What insights can we gain by reading Genesis that way? So, that's a question for you. Question for us. By the way, the questions I've put up there are questions that I'm puzzling with that I don't have the answers to. That's why I put them up there. Hopefully someone will help me find the answers, if there are answers. Right? Anyway, second part is prophets. Former prophets, latter prophets, and minor prophets. As you can see, the former prophets are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. Now, Samuel and Kings were each of them was one book. Kings was one book, but two scrolls. For some reason, in our translation of the Bible, we have 1 Kings and 2 Kings rather than Kings. Why did we do that? Psalms is in two scrolls, but we call that one book of Psalms. So why do we keep the Psalms as one book, split Kings into two books? Don't know, but that's one of the questions that I don't have time to get to. Yeah? So, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Same question I asked for Genesis. Would we read these books differently if we viewed them as books of prophecy? Then you've got the writings. The poetic books, Psalms, Proverbs, Job. You've got the 5 scrolls, and you can read them there. Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther. In some Jewish traditions, each of these scrolls is associated with a separate festival and is read during that Jewish festival. And then you've got the other books. Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah are one book, and Chronicles is one book. Brings the next question. Kings is a book of prophecy. Ezekiel is a book of prophecy. Chronicles is not a book of prophecy. Daniel is not a book of prophecy. What's that telling us about the Bible's idea of what prophecy is? Not what our idea of what prophecy is. What's that distinction telling us about the Old Testament's view of what prophecy is and is not? Now, who wrote it? When did they write it? All that stuff. I'm going to avoid most of that debate, but I'm just going to look at what the Tanakh actually says about itself, about how and when it was written. So, if you look at Psalms, they are clearly a compilation. You see that? I've doubled up in some slides. This is an example of one of these rushed, cheap copies trying to do it, and there's errors in it, and you need to spot the errors. Yeah? So, the Psalms are a compilation. Psalm 51, verse 1, for the director of music, a psalm of David, when the prophet Nathan came to him after David committed adultery with Bathsheba. So that's David, that happened about 1000 BC. Psalm 137, verse 1, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down, there we wept when we remember Zion. Happened after the exile, 400 years or more after the first psalm. So, clearly, someone has sat down and compiled a list of songs dating over this big period. Proverbs is another example of a compilation. You've got Proverbs 10 verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. Proverbs 30 verse 1, the sayings of Agur. Proverbs 31 verse 1, the sayings of King Lemuel. Proverbs is telling us that it's a compilation of different things. And someone or some people have gone through the whole list of various songs or various sayings or whatever and decided these are the ones we're going to keep in this sacred library. And the fact that it's got by the rivers of Babylon in it, that process was done after they've gone to Babylon, clearly. Right? Now, Kings, you read the book of Kings, it sounds like one voice throughout. You know, Proverbs, Psalms, you can hear different people speaking. Kings is one voice, but they give, whoever wrote Kings gives references. The Annals of Solomon, the Annals of the Kings of Israel, the Annals of the Kings of Judah. So the Annals suggests a library of books that have been written, and whoever wrote Kings has gone into these libraries, taken material and compiled a coherent list. Yeah? That's what it's telling us is happening. Chronicles covers the same time period, but uses a completely different set of sources. Yeah? Just records from ancient times, whatever they were. You know, genealogical records, records of Samuel the seer, records of Nathan, records of Gad, the prophecy of Ahijah, the visions of Iddo, the records of Shemaiah, the records of the seers, the annals of King David, the annals of Jehu, the annals of the kings of Israel. That last one's the only one shared, the only source shared with the book of Kings. So what you've got is two separate stories of the same event, but using a completely different set of sources or different libraries. You know? So that's what the Bible's telling us about how the Bible was made. Oh, right. Next big thing that happens is the Septuagint. So after Alexander comes, his followers stay. They turn the whole thing into a series of Greek empires. People start speaking Greek. The Jews decide it would be good to translate the Tanakh into Greek. And a bunch of 70 people, hence the name Septuagint, do so. At the same time, they also write a number of books about the things that have happened. And that gives us the book of Maccabees, the book of Judith, the book of Tobit, stuff like that. That's a wee fragment of what it looked like. Some of the Jews at the time are concerned about the quality of the translation into Greek. And these new books that have been written are important, but they're not as important as the Tanakh. So, when reading the Bible, here's a wee rule of thumb. If it talks about the law, you know, Psalm 119, how I love the law. When Jesus meets teachers of the law, they're talking about the law section of the Tanakh. All right? I love the law, your law has guided me. It's just talking about the Tanakh. When it talks about the law and the prophets, you know, love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, love your neighbours as yourself. That sums up all the law and the prophets. That's shorthand for the whole Tanakh. Scripture is usually shorthand for the whole Tanakh. You don't see the word Scripture in the Old Testament, except some translations will use it in some verses. But if you look across translations, the translation that uses Scripture in this verse doesn't use it in that verse, and another translation will use it in that verse, but not this verse. So there's no consistent use of the word Scripture in the Old Testament. It's just a New Testament word. So Scripture, Tanakh, the law and the prophets, Tanakh, the law, just the books of the law. All sounds straightforward, yeah? So far, so complicated, but some people aren't happy, yeah? By the time of the New Testament, there are many different types of Jewishness, and some of them are killing each other because they're the wrong type of Jew. You know, for an example, Catholics view themselves as Christians. Protestants view themselves as Christians. What happened in Northern Ireland from the 1960s up until now, yeah? So you've got similar things happening among the Jews at that time. Only the differences between Protestant Catholics are nowhere near as big as the difference between some of these different Jewish factions, and they've got lots of them. I'm only going to talk about two. The Pharisees, you've heard of them, they are in favour of the whole of the Tanakh. The Sadducees say only the law has authority. Yeah. So you've got this argument among Judaism. What is and is not Scripture? Does Scripture exist? Is it just the law? Yeah? So you have that argument. Also, because you buy scrolls individually, a lot of people don't have the full set. Yeah? If I buy the Bible, I get the whole shebang. Yeah? But if you're buying individual books, you might not have much money. Yeah? So the Dead Sea Scrolls, you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Some guys found some books of holy books dating back to about the time of Jesus-ish, and they found 30 copies of the book of Deuteronomy, 20 copies of the book of Isaiah, and most of the books were a single-figure numbers, and some of them there's only one or two. So Isaiah and Deuteronomy were the big sellers. The other thing, and so people seem to have favourites. The other thing is you've got that quality issue I talked about. So, putting all this together, at the time of Gospel and Acts, many different ideas of what it means to be Jewish. And these groups have different ideas of what books are holy. The Sadducees, it's only Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. By the way, everything that I say, you'll find people who disagree with me. Violently, yeah? Because this is human beings we're talking about, and the Bible's important. So if back in the day they're having argy-bargies about what actually is the Bible, there are people who will say, actually, they weren't having argy-bargies about what is the Bible. Everyone agreed. And then you have other people saying, the Tanakh didn't exist until 200 years after Jesus, yeah? So, yeah. So I'm trying to give you the consensus view, but you need to be aware of that. The Pharisees, all the Tanakh is holy. The Tanakh is all the books that we have in our Old Testament. But they had them organized in a very strict way according to the type of book, and the church has kind of binned that for reasons. There are other Jewish groups, there are other books that I haven't talked about that are holy to some groups. Too complicated for now. Of the books from the Tanakh that have been found, none of them are exactly the same as any other. Yeah? Like I was saying about copies, if you have the choice, I could have no copy of the Bible, or I'll have a cheap and cheerful copy that I know has some errors. What would you choose? Yeah? So a lot of people have chosen, and then it's the accident of survival. A lot of Jewish books weren't lost. They were actively destroyed, yeah? There was an active destruction of Jewish material, a lot of it carried out by the church, yeah? But that's another story for another time. At the time of the Gospel Acts, there are many different ideas of what it means to be Jewish. I said that, that's against another one of these errors. So again, if you've got a book of Isaiah and it's got errors in it, you can think, oh, hang on, that's obviously an error because it's clearly an error. So yeah, anyway. So the Tanakh is a library. There's no one volume. They haven't invented this thing which we call the Codex yet. So there's no one volume big enough to hold all the books. I think that explains what Paul's talking about in 2 Timothy 3:16 when it says all Scripture is inspired by God. He's meaning the Tanakh. He's saying it in a context when some people don't think all the Tanakh's important. He's also saying it in a time when some people can't afford to have easy access to all the Tanakh. You're in a poor community somewhere in the Afghan hills. Your nearest Jewish community might be away, some distance away, but it's, and you don't have the whole Tanakh. So how do you, between yourselves, arrange that everyone has access to the whole Scripture? It requires effort, it requires cooperation. So, are there bits of the Bible you don't read? Are there bits of the Bible our church doesn't read, our church doesn't preach on, if all Scripture is inspired by God? And our reasons for not reading all Scripture, are they good reasons? Right, I think that's all I've got time for. What I'll do is I will scrabble to the end if I can. Is there a way to get to the end? Right, okay. I'll end with a quote from Rabbi Hillel, who was a rabbi who died, we don't know when he was born, but he died at 10 AD. So his life overlapped with that of Jesus. And someone asked him to sum up the law, the Torah. And he said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah. All else is commentary. Go and learn." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Douglas, and thank you so much for all the preparation and time that went into that at short notice. Right, I'm just going to invite the band back up. This sermon series is going to build on each other. So this was the kind of academic part that's really important that we understand the context. And like I said, Adrian's going to be talking about the big stories, the big themes of the Bible. How do these things link together? And then the third week is going to be like, how do we use this text? How do we use this text? So thank you, Douglas.